you like the John Wick movies? Do you like the anime Spy Family? Well, have I got something that happens to be what is effectively both of those mashed together? You can think of Sakamoto Days as effectively being a much more wholesome version of John Wick, in which the legendary hitman Taro Sakamoto falls in love with the cashier at a convenience store one day and decides to retire from killing people entirely, just to marry her. Of course, this is forbidden, and that prompts the underworld to track him down and try to kill him 5 years later. This series is nothing if not needlessly goofy, okay? It hardly has the most amazing plot. Effectively, it evolves around Sakamoto dodging attacks from fellow hitmen, all while trying to live his everyday life. Meanwhile, there's a darker plot brewing in the background with a guy going around whacking other hitmen. It doesn't really get much deeper than that, so it's just sort of an okay shonen action plot with some fun combat sequences to offer. What I can say about this anime from what I've seen so far is that while it isn't the kind of thing I would absolutely love to watch, considering I feel it lacks in terms of compelling story and characters, it's still something I can understand why people would be excited for it. For starters, the series isn't terribly dark or overly downcast. It isn't dreary or glum. It actually has some element of fun and whimsy to it. It does its best to be goofy and not take things too terribly seriously. So for what it's worth, you can get a laugh out of the series for the fact that it's just so utterly ridiculous at times. Like Sakamoto trying to capture a mechanized T-Rex skeleton because he thinks his daughter will like it. And it's decently well animated, even if not to the levels much of the fandom had expected or wanted out of it. And their reaction kind of leads me to believe that the manga largely survived on the concept of solo leveling quality action series, which this doesn't really deliver. However, outside of that, it's really not all that much of a point of interest for me this season. And I feel the need to be entirely honest about my history with this series and how I actually wasn't really all that interested in the manga to begin with. So the anime wasn't really something I was looking forward to as much as fans of the manga were. I dropped this series back when the first volume or two of the manga was still out. Like I said, there isn't really much to the plot other than the crew constantly reacting to hitmen who are ballsy enough to try and collect the bounty on Sakamoto's head, while they get up to all sorts of wacky adventures like airsoft competitions and such. And characters, while serviceable, don't really hook me in. They're pretty straightforward and simple, lacking any real nuance to them or intriguing twists to their behavior that would really sell me on them being worth watching for. Shin is a clairvoyant who admires Sakamoto. In more recent episodes, his complex over his clairvoyance has come up. However, I'm still not really sold on him. Lou is a very family-oriented girl, something I can respect, but she's also a dumbass who doesn't seem to be much use so far outside of buying time for the others and getting drunk. And Sakamoto is a family man who loves his wife and daughter more than anything, but his conversion from hitman to family man comes off as pretty cheesy so far. That said, what I think makes me the most irritated about this is the fact that it feels so at odds with itself for two reasons. The first being that every assassin has their own unique gimmick that makes up their identity, like a pizza man delivery guy, or said telepathic like Shin. Not that this is really an issue in and of itself, but it creates a point of contrast that just doesn't work for me. It almost wants to make light of something that happens to be a pretty dark element in the form of an entire Japanese underworld, and that comes off to me as a tonal clash, especially when it comes to the family's no-kill rule. So Sakamoto is limited in what he can do to protect his family from being collateral damage, as gimmick assassins continue to pile on in an attempt at his life. In trying to pursue a much lighter and more whimsical tone, it almost stabs its entire assassin-based plot in the back. Even Spy Family did a better job integrating the darker parts of its series with the more goofy elements that it had. And I wasn't exactly a huge fan of Spy Family either for a very similar reason. It was too much family, not enough spy. As much as I do find it entertaining for its goofy ideas, it at times almost seems too goofy. Or rather goofy in all the wrong ways for me. It almost tries to be too wholesome for its own good at times and just comes off as a series of mediocre gag battles that I find myself terribly uninterested in. Sure, Lou going all drunken fist had its moments, but I wasn't seriously there for it like I was when Rock Lee did it against Kimimaro. The boiled fight was fun to watch just for Sakamoto and action, but it didn't really have the same kind of lasting impression as other good fights. And a giant mechanized T-Rex was just a little too far out there for me. I think the idea of Sakamoto retiring for love and family and having to protect his wife and daughter from vengeful enemies is good, but I feel like it probably could have taken itself a tad more seriously at times, because it's hard to buy into the whole thing when it's all riddled with very stereotypical shonen elements and writing done in almost ironically bad fashion. All this leads to a huge lack of stakes, in my opinion. Like, there's nothing really of consequence going on, because none of the main characters are actually going to bite it. It hasn't really convinced me of their mortality or the fact that they can be beaten. Of all these things, it's the lack of any real gripping characters in this series that makes it fall apart at the seams for me, just like the manga did. Pointing yet again to the fact that the core writing and attitude towards storytelling just doesn't satisfy me. But it is still a watchable show. It doesn't make me miserable. I still do find some pleasure in it, so that in and of itself should be an endorsement that, hey, it's an entertaining show enough. If you want to sit down and turn your brain off and just watch something dumb, this is pretty much the perfect anime for that. Up until the animators prove they know nothing about how guns work. Seriously, in the first episode, Shin fires a shot from a semi-automatic pistol. The slide doesn't move but ejects a cartridge. Which, that's not how that gun works. It looks like a Beretta. That's not how that would work. Then he proceeds to cock the pistol, rechamber around, and eject yet another cartridge. That wouldn't be a spent cartridge at that point, because when the spent cartridge is ejected, a new loaded cartridge is put into the chamber. What he effectively did was waste time ejecting a bullet from his gun to look cool. And I know this is a semi-automatic pistol because he literally uses the gun properly much later in the series. And we know it's the same gun because Sakamoto puts a tracker on it, and that's how he's able to find Shin and save him. And don't even get me started on the 3-round burst of bolt action rifle. That shit don't make sense. But seriously, when it comes to the writing or story or whatever, they may not be for me, but plenty of other people will enjoy it. That part is opinionated. When it comes to the gun mechanics, that is an objective boo-boo. And it's something that really pisses me off about a series is when they don't know how a fucking gun functions. Not that the functionality of their weapons is really something that determines the quality of the story. It's just a personal pet peeve of mine, okay? Still, like I said, for what it's worth, there's still some enjoyment to it. It's still somewhat fun to watch. I just don't think this series was ever as amazing as many of its proponents cracked it up to be.